And you're live.
Welcome to House Education, Tuesday, May 20th, 2025. The committee is continuing its discussion of the situation at the federal level and how it is affecting the situation in Vermont. And we have two folks here, our favorite presenters on this topic from the Agency of Education. May not be our favorite topic, but you're our favorite presenters on it.
It's a limited logic problem.
Anyway, the floor is yours, and thanks for coming in.
I'll kick it off. For the record, Ann Bordnero, Director of Federal Programs at the Agency of Ed. So I have some good news and some not good. So not terrible news, but anyway, I'll start with the good news. So we got our Title I program allocations, the preliminary allocations last week. Hallelujah. And the numbers were similar to what we expected. They change every year. There's the top line congressional allocation, and then they have to adjust based on poverty rates in different states. So ours dropped slightly, but that was entirely justified by our poverty numbers. So essentially we were level funded. Now, because when we get those numbers, we have to do a lot of manipulations to them before we can load them as actual LEA allocations. We have to calculate mandatory set-asides for school improvement, for homeless education, for state administrative reservations, different things like that. We have to do hold harmless because sometimes LEAs lose eligibility for certain grants, but they have certain entitlements for a certain number of years under hold harmless, blah, blah, blah. A lot of calculations. So we're busily working on that right now to get those done. And meanwhile, the applications are open in our grants management system so that folks in the field can build. We used the hold harmless amounts that we calculated based on our expectation of level funding, which is around 80% for most of them, so they can build their applications. And then when we get the final awards, which we have been told will come on time on July 1 and October 1, we shall see, then we will put the actual amounts in there, and then we'll have to go through the same process again, but then we will put the actual amounts in there and they can adjust their applications. Usually the numbers aren't that different from the preliminary and the final. So that is all good news. Very late, but good news. For all the other title programs, Title II, 3, 4, McKinney-Vento, 5, we are still waiting for our allocations, as is every other state. And at this point, no one's giving timelines anymore. The holdup does not even appear to be at the Department of Education. The holdup appears to be with Office of Management and Budget and the way the continuing resolution was drafted back in March. So anyway, we're just hoping and waiting on those program allocations. We have meanwhile loaded 80%, which is something we've done in the past, of last year's allocations for each of those programs so that folks can continue to build their applications for work that could begin this summer, like professional learning and all. But we will rest much more comfortably once we get the allocations. And it doesn't appear we'll get preliminaries, but it looks like they're just going to skip that step at this point. So fingers crossed, we will get those. If not, we have a plan for July 1. If we don't have actual grant awards on July 1 for one or more programs, we will not release money that we don't have. We'll have to hold, but people can continue to build their applications on the assumption that the money's coming. So that is the bottom line for federal FY25, which is school year 25-26 in terms of where we stand for ESEA programs. For IDEA, we did get our awards for both the 619, which is the additional pre-K component, and the 611, which is the major component, the 3 to 21, 2 weeks ago. So our numbers again were in line with what we expected, and so that is very good news. Those applications are not quite open in our grants management system. They're being finalized with testing and all. There was a lot of backlog of work with our vendor for grants management. But hopefully in a week or so, they'll be open and they can start building their IDEA applications. With Perkins, we also, actually, that was the first one we got. We got our 25-26 Perkins allocation. That was what we expected. And the team did whatever adjustments they need to do on their end and did send the allocations to the centers last week. The application is not quite open yet in the grants management system because of the same vendor, delays, but as soon as it is, which is hopefully again within the week, folks will be able to build their 25-26 Perkins applications. So that would round out our federal programs for the next school year.
And that was, this is all kind of expected. I think previously you've testified that just because of the way the fiscal years run, that you weren't anticipating drops in these allocations. Is that the same funding that we're talking about? Yeah.
Because once the continuing resolution passed in March, that essentially level funded the education programs in that resolution. And we're always forward funded, so we're still operating in federal FY 24 funds through June 30. We knew then that forward funding and level funding would mean that for 25-26, we should basically get what we got last year, roughly. To be frank, I am anxious about the other title programs just because any amount of wiggle room at this point for the administration to do what they want to do makes me nervous. And there was apparently less specificity in the way the CR was written than there has been in the past for some of those other programs. In other words, they didn't have line items for each. They had sort of top line numbers. So hopefully they will stick to the promise to level fund each program and not fiddle with things. But as I said, I'll believe it when I see it. So we're going on the assumption that they will. Now things get a little dicier. So the federal FY 25 reconciliation bill that you've probably heard about, they scheduled a 1 a.m. meeting tonight, this morning, whatever you want to call it, tomorrow morning, in the House on their version that they're hoping to get out before this weekend. There's major disagreements among the Republican caucus on the bill. The Senate has also significant disagreements, Senate Republicans. So, I guess I'm just waiting and seeing how it shakes out, because the biggest concern, which we've talked about in here before, is really about Medicaid. In terms of us, it's about Medicaid funding. And I know that that's a major source of contention within the Republican caucus itself. Cuts to Medicaid in terms of state share would increase, would mean essentially a cut. Work requirements for Medicaid recipient, or additional work requirements for Medicaid recipients, cuts in overall funding for Medicaid, all of those things would have, cascading impacts on our children's eligibility potentially, and then family, and then children, and then our numbers, poverty numbers, and things like that. So we're just standing by, waiting to see how that all plays out. It could be quite a lengthy process for them to get to the end. This is the same bill that will finish defense spending, border security spending, the tax cuts. There's also a lot of contention about the tax cuts. And as you know, our Moody's downgraded the US bond rating because of concerns about the debt increasing under this potential bill. And so lots to come there. And that is FY 25. That is to finish federal FY 25, the rest of the budget that wasn't covered in the CR, along with the tax cuts, which expire in December.
Is one of the potential cascading effects of the changes in Medicaid eligibility that the way in which we determine poverty for our universal school meals program, does it affect that?
It does. Or it could potentially. So if fewer children reside in households that get SNAP or Medicaid or TANF benefits in coming years, then they will not be eligible to be directly certified for free school meals or reduced price school meals in the case of Medicaid. They could still theoretically be eligible if they filled out a school meals application. So maybe they wouldn't qualify for SNAP, but they still might be, say, below 130% of the poverty line. So it's not entirely impossible that could happen, but the concerns here are going back to applications after all these years, it's going to be very hard to get families to fill them out. It always was, and it's going to be even harder. And also, what's the other one? Getting people to fill out applications. Oh, and then the administrative burden on schools, again, of having to collect and verify and all the rest applications, is going to be, and go back to having unpaid meal balances and having to pull from general fund to cover unpaid meal balances. And, so it might not change. If everybody started filling out forms, it might not change our actual poverty numbers that much. If a family is poor, they're poor, whether they qualify for SNAP or not, based on the rules of the program. But the reality is that we expect to see a drop in our directly certified eligible population if there are cuts or changes in the eligibilities for Medicaid and SNAP. So that just means that a lot more work for schools, a lot more expectations of parents to go back to filling out forms in order to keep our numbers where they are accurate, to really reflect poverty. So that is a real concern. One good thing we're doing, and we're keeping it very quiet, is there are rules within. Yes, exactly. It's not illegal, but we don't want the feds to notice this part of the legislation.
And you're giving public testimony.
We're being uploaded to YouTube.
Okay. Well, yeah.
One potential option we're exploring.
Right.
There we go.
Yeah. We do have protections within the federal child nutrition legislation for like once a school is eligible or an area is eligible, that can continue for several years under the law. And that that is the reality. So I guess I'm saying that's something we're counting heavily on. If a school area is area eligible now for say CEP, community eligibility provision, and summer and all the rest, as long as they that will continue. So even if the poverty numbers were to drop next year with or without any changes at the federal level, those numbers would carry for a few years. So that is a really great thing. And that's one of the reasons we love CEP and Provision 2 is because they have these protections built in for variability year to year.
Yeah, I could be totally wrong. I thought when we finally went to universal meals, we were going to a universal household income form for all students in all schools. And I know there's I think Hunger Free worked on this. I know AOE worked on this. I think Rosie talked to us about it. Again, getting people to fill it out is important, but it's slightly different than saying an application for free and reduced price meals. It's supposed to be an income form everyone's filling out.
Yes.
So
We do have the household income form. We absolutely have it. We have an electronic version. We have a paper version. We update it every year. And we do get a certain number of families who complete that. The reality is you cannot qualify for school meals under the USDA program without completing the USDA form. So if we were to expect significant cuts in SNAP or Medicaid, then in order for those families, they're still going to get a meal in Vermont because of universal meals. But in order to be able to claim the reimbursement from the feds to help pay for that, we would have to have them fill out a USDA school meal application. The way we use the household income form is that where applications are no longer required. And in Vermont, the way you wrote the lovely legislation, it was so smart. Thanks to many people, is that every school has to participate in the most beneficial program option that they're able to. So most of our schools, our public schools, are doing CEP or Provision 2, which is where I was saying that carries over. Those CEP schools don't collect school meals applications by definition. It's relying on direct certification. So the problem there is that we don't have income information on other children in the school. Right. So we use the household income form to actually determine at the individual level who's poor and who's not poor. You can use a multiplier. So you've got, an identified student percentage of, which is the kids who are directly certified at 130% or less. let's say 20%, but then to determine the poverty level for that school, you can multiply, for education reasons, you can multiply times 0.6. So you get a percent, which is really valuable, but it doesn't tell you which individual children have which income. And so like if they're going for some other benefits or programs, they need to fill it out. We also use that form when the school is not participating in the National School Lunch Program in any way. So we have independent schools that are not participating in the National School Lunch Program. They use the form, or they're participating but not through CEP or Provision 2. They're using the regular option, so they may also use that form. We do every year a training where we have certain circumstances where they're supposed to use that form. It's kind of the option of last resort for verifying a family's income when we can't do so directly through other data sources, like, shared data from Agency of Human Services, from Head Start, from, Economic Services Division, whatever. So we rely on forms less and less and less than we used to, which is a good thing. Yeah.
But as Medicaid eligibility changes and SNAP eligibility changes, that the need for those forms may become more and more important.
Yes, and including the school meals application itself. And I mean, we don't know how this is going to play out. There are certainly lots of voices in the House and Senate among Republicans. And I say Republicans because Democrats don't matter in this conversation. I'm not trying to be partisan here, but in terms of the conversation among Republicans who are going to make the decision on this bill, there are strong arguments against cutting Medicaid as well. Lots of states have lots of populations that depend on it, just like we do. So, how this will play out. And I think I mentioned in a previous testimony too, whether it will play out like over this 10-year of savings, like will it actually be front loaded, back loaded, evenly spread out? There's a lot of maneuvers going on that way. So we really don't know how this is all going to play out, but we continue to watch and hope and, do what we can to advocate.
Ooh.
So I'll move on.
Looking ahead a little bit.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I mean, things get less good the further we go ahead.
Really do.
So the White House released their federal FY26 skinny budget 2 weeks ago. The skinny budget is just like it sounds. It's basically kind of almost like an executive summary of the White House's proposed budget that is always presented ahead of the full budget. And it's just the opening salvo in federal FY26, which would be school year 26-27 budget negotiations. So then the House and Senate appropriations and like in this case, education committees and all take these things up and, could look completely different by the time it gets through that process. But nevertheless, it gives you a picture of what the White House's preferences and priorities are. And so we can see pretty clearly that they've included some significant cuts, including elimination of Title III, which was also in their budget, House Republican caucus's budget 2 years ago, when Biden was still president and it didn't get through. So eliminate Title III entirely, eliminate migrant ed entirely, eliminate adult education entirely.
How big a number is that for Vermont, adult education from the federal government?
News channel, my inner Robin Castle.
I don't know.
I want to say it's like $2 to $3 million. It's not a huge amount, but we'll get you the number.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, relatively.
I appreciate it.
Yep. Preschool development grants, teacher quality partnership grants, as well as cuts to Perkins. So Perkins isn't proposed in the skinny budget to be eliminated, but to be cut, which seems really at odds with other things we're
That
hearing.
was surprising.
Yeah.
For the committee's clarification, Perkins is really just about CTE.
Yes. Yeah, and that's why I'm surprised, given other
Right.
sort of statements that have been made that. So anyway, the other big things that you've probably heard in the news, one is that they're talking about creating an IDEA would be one level funded block grant. So it would be level funded, meaning the amount wouldn't change, but it would all be combined. All the parts of IDEA would be combined into one block grant. And the ESEA would become two grants. So one of them would be Title I, again, level funded. And the other would be a consolidated block grant for 18 other formula and competitive grants. But nowhere has that been specified publicly, what those other 18 formula and competitive grants are. there's also a top line number that looks about $4 billion less than current funding for that, everything that's not Title I. But again, we don't know. Would that be because of eliminating Title III? Could you still spend some of that block grant on, yeah, there's so many questions. There's more questions than answers.
We keep hearing about IDEA being a level funded block grant, which means that basically they hand you the money to the state and say, you deal with IDEA, we're not going to have a bunch of strings attached to it.
We don't know. We have no idea what it means.
I also don't know
Could be.
if it's a good thing or a bad thing.
Well,
Yeah.
I think if you level fund it and leave maintenance of effort, I mean, like,
I assume that goes out the window.
everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I said it raises more questions than answers. There's so little information been provided. I'm not sure that anyone has thought through these questions yet. And that's, certainly, I don't believe that a lot, that most of the staff at Ed were consulted about any of this, including some of the political staff, the appointees. So they don't have answers that they're able to give our contacts through CCSSO. It seems like a lot of these decisions are being made out of the hands of both political and career staff. So at the various highest levels of political staff and folks in, the budget inner circle. So, but as I said, once they get through reconciliation, which we don't know how long that'll take, these will go to the House and Senate, and we have no idea if they'll be able to work out anything before the beginning of the next fiscal year. We could be in another CR again, and that wouldn't be surprising. And actually, that might be the best outcome. So I actually hope they can't figure it out. So that's, and once again, I don't think, well, if they followed the usual process for budget, then there would need to be 60 votes in the Senate, unlike the reconciliation bill. So paying attention to Democratic, input would be important. But at this point, I don't know what process anything is taking. So, so that's where we stand with money.
I get to finish us out.
Yeah, one good piece of news that just came through, I think today or yesterday, was we did get the rest of our FY25. So in this case, this means through 9/30, child nutrition administrative allocation. So that means the funds for our state agency administration of child nutrition programs, and we actually got more than we expected. So that's a good thing.
The low bar of success, but we will take it.
Yes, exactly. So
That thing that we've been
Yeah.
waiting to get.
So we were happy about that. So we don't know, the next year's worth will be in this budget request. But for now, we're set through 9/30/25. And we're able to carry forward a portion of that. That's under the law. So we can be judicious about those funds and try to create a little bit of a cushion, to protect against what might happen next year in terms of administrative funding.
Okay. So moving from the theoretical future state to the very immediate issue of ESSER liquidation extension. So as of yesterday, we have submitted a total of 54 liquidation extensions. Those are projects. So I'm using air quotes because project is not a term that means anything in a federal context. So everyone is kind of creating their own definition. And so that is, many of our districts are submitting more than one project. And we're helping them to sort of try to identify what that means. So we have submitted 54 extension requests, 49 LEA projects totaling close to $9 million, and 5 state level projects totaling to date 1.2 million. We've got another 13 that are from districts that are ready to go. I'm working on the remaining 3 or 4 at the state level. So we're hoping to get another submission in, I think, by Friday. And we may have 1 or 2 more after that. So
2 more
1 or 2
for
more batches
of
requests.
to basically be reimbursed for money spent
Yeah,
on an ESSER
the
approved problem.
majority of what we're submitting right now is for costs already incurred and paid. There are a few submissions for requests for ongoing services.
When
But
you say paid by the
by the
school district.
districts or by the state.
Yeah.
So everyone is paying their invoices.
Right.
As they're required to do. So these are, it's financial liability that we have all incurred, and we're asking the Department of Education to make us whole.
So the example for the committee was, we heard when we had Bellows Falls testifying and they were still at 1.1 million.
So you can see on the last page, we've kind of broken down into types of projects that are being requested. Obviously, the ones that are going to be the bigger ticket number is the facilities and construction. Some of those are small, but we do have some big tickets. So you've heard from Wyndham Northeast around Bellows Falls. We also have Burlington. Burlington is a live project. So that is not great, right? They're literally halfway through a major HVAC project, and like ceilings are pulled down and they wouldn't be able to use those classrooms. We also have a lot of professional development and training is another kind of theme. Most of our state level grants or our state level contracts are for that type of thing, or services, consulted services. We do have some direct services to students as well, including some after school programs. So that's where we're at in terms of the submissions. I'm going to share with you what we know and what we've heard from the Department of Ed. We're still, the information is not what we would hope to hear, but it's at least information. So we heard through our partners at CCSSO, we've also been working, I want to give a shout out to the Sanders team. They've been incredibly helpful. They reached out to us and asked basically how can we help? And there's two narrative questions that are really central to each of these requests that have to be submitted. And they are very time and labor intensive. Frankly, this is like, I'm the bottleneck right now for the state level because I have to draft out major narratives and rationales for our requests. So the Sanders team, both in DC and Vermont, worked and coordinated with us, and then we're able to reach out directly to the districts. So we now have a nice process where the districts sort of send their draft to the Sanders team. They make edits that are in line with, everything that we can think of to best position our requests. And then they get submitted by the districts after they've got those edits back through us. And then we send them along after we do a check for, accuracy and make sure all the elements are there. The Sanders team has been incredibly timely and helpful. And I just think it's really been a great partnership. We're very, very thankful that they've been there. Here's what we've heard. So we have yet to receive a response on our request. We did a request on the 25th of April, then we did another request May 14th, and then we did another request May 19th. We haven't heard anything back yet. So what we are hearing is that the department is rejecting most of the requests that they are getting. Mm-hmm. The ones that they have approved have been very direct services to students. And by that, you should interpret that as tutoring for students, very direct one-to-one sort of services directly to students. They have been rejecting professional development, which we know directly benefits students, but that second step is they're rejecting those. We have heard that they've rejected construction projects. We've heard that they've accepted some after school, but rejected others. Here's what we don't know. We have no visibility on the quality of those submissions, right? I don't know what was included. We are trying to be gold star kids, right? And really do, all of our narratives. It's, the districts and the state, we show the data, right? This is why we had this need. Then we describe what we did. Then we talk about what the outcome was for students and really try to make those connections with HVAC. We're, talking about rates of airflow and reduction in absenteeism and really trying to lay out a very strong case. So we don't know what the quality of those submissions is, but they are pretty clearly thematic. So this doesn't bode well for us in terms of what we have submitted. We are being very practical, and we anticipate that the majority of what we submitted will likely be rejected. There is an appeals process that's posted on the website. It's like a link to a web page with no additional information, so that's not great. On a call with other deputies last week, I was hearing that some states had received their rejections and they were gearing up to do the appeals process, but had not yet submitted. So nobody knows what that looks like. Our understanding, based on what has been posted on the Department of Ed, is that the kind of first round of review is stopping at with Haley Sannon, she has a very long title. It's a deputy,
Something, yeah.
And that the appeal process will be decided upon by the secretary, which makes sense. You wouldn't have the secretary reviewing something she'd already rejected. That's our sort of word of mouth understanding of what that process is going to look like. But I'm not particularly optimistic at this point. So we had tracked at the state level, we're probably about 1.6 million in sort of financial exposure, 1.7 million, I think. Again, we've paid all of our invoices at this point, so we're sitting on that. At the district level, thus far, we're close to 9 million, and we anticipate probably another 2 million, maybe a little bit higher than that coming in. We still have some big projects that haven't submitted yet. So all in, I think we may be looking at somewhere around 14 million of financial liability that we are or have incurred.
So these dollars are sitting where? In other words, I sort of have it in my mind that, you know, at a certain point, the ARP ESSER dollars sort of came to Vermont and sitting in a bank account in Vermont in order to do all this reimbursing.
We request reimbursement from, so we get an award and then we grant to districts, right? They incur the cost. They seek reimbursement from us. We pay at the state level. We pay their reimbursement, and then we seek reimbursement from the federal government.
But that's not the case with like an HVAC project, where the district probably paid all the invoices.
Then, yeah, they have to pay the invoices before they can seek reimbursement from
Right,
us.
so in the example of Bellows Falls, they have spent all this money on their HVAC work. They paid their invoices
Yes.
to the state level.
Yeah.
You haven't reimbursed them
No,
because you don't have the.
we don't have the money.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And okay, so then you go to the federal government, let's just track Bellows Falls.
So we also had a situation where we had at the state level paid some of those reimbursements. So from the district, they're kind of free and clear.
Yeah.
But we now are sitting on that. So it got past one level up the chain. And we are sitting on some things that we have paid to districts, but we cannot seek reimbursement on yet as well.
It's interesting just in terms of who makes you whole, the ed fund or the general fund in those sorts of situations. Just interesting thought experiment.
It is an interesting thought experiment.
Do you know what that number is?
No, I'd have to look. We did have, so when we go back to March 28th, when Jill got off the plane from DC and Jill's phone started blowing up, we did submit 1.2 million that we had paid to districts at that point. We got it in at like 4:58 and the cutoff was 5 o'clock. And the letter didn't go out until 5:03, which was great. We have been reimbursed for that one, like 1.2 million. So we did get that. So we are not sitting on that. The districts got paid for that. And we also, everything else is frozen.
So when you talk about this appeals process, you say that the appeal goes to the secretary,
We think so.
right? It's not like Linda McMahon is sitting in her office reading all of these appeals. But other than that, you have no idea.
So, and
This stuff could be going to an empty mailbox as far as you know.
there's no description of what you'd have to do to appeal compared to what you did to
And
make
it's-
that request.
Yeah, it's a generic appeal process that exists anywhere in federal government, so it's not,
Yeah.
yes, and to your point, I don't think that it's landing on Secretary McMahon's desk. We are unclear. We're unclear on what we would need to submit. We're unclear on who would receive it. We're unclear on what the process would be. So we are definitely going to be looking at our neighboring states and what they're submitting. The rejections don't seem to be red state or blue state.
No.
So it doesn't seem to be political in that sense. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, frankly, because that would be more clear. So that is where we are.
If you're highly successful in all of that, then you can contract out the state services to do other states' applications.
Yes, absolutely.
Take a cut.
Turns out our gold star kid,
Well, a lot of states also had different kinds of projects and
Right.
are getting their direct services projects approved and all their others. So it's not like they did a good or a bad job overall.
yeah.
It's almost as if a machine is reading what the words are in the applications and saying,
And we've tried to be very careful
Yeah.
in our language. Again, working with the Sanders team, really thinking about like making the rationales. But if I have yet to see or hear of a construction project that has gone through, right? And we have some very strong HVAC projects. It was the challenge here is that the ESSER funds came with a very long list of allowable funds, and that's what we were on because that's our job, and we did a good job. And particularly around construction, we at the state built a process that other states built from because it was that robust and that thorough, right? We did not build sports stadiums, right? We didn't build pools. We were very careful about what we built and we really asked for that rationale. None of that matters at this point. Anything around allowability has gone out the door. It's now we're at, and this is, to be clear, this is well within the law. It's now entirely at the secretary's discretion. And so that's why those new questions have come in. And those questions don't have anything to do with allowability or the original intent of the funds. They are entirely what the secretary's discretion is sort of determining.
it is at a national level with sort of the organizations you deal with. Is there talk of any sort of legal action since there was a
Yeah, so
allowable uses and now that's being thrown out
yeah,
the
there
window?
already is a lawsuit that I think 14 states have going. And it was more around sort of the timing of everything. So they got an additional amount of time, but that in which they could have incurred costs for eligibility, but nobody did that, right? When things cut off on March 28th, we all stopped our contracted services, right? So they had until May 24th, but then they all have to submit by then. So it was a bit of a wash. I think all states are contemplating what the next steps might be in terms of legal action, and we will provide you all with an update should that come to fruition. I know, kind of the bummer end of the testimony. Yeah.
Should have led with that.
Yeah.
So I would just ask that sort of as you learn, especially about the liquidation stuff, as you sort of learn the fate,
Yeah.
let us know.
Yeah, my sort of plan has been over the, because it will likely be after you all are adjourned, but certainly to keep JFO, the E-Board, Joint Fiscal Committee, keep them apprised of what's happening, so that folks are prepared for next session.
Thank you both very much. Appreciate you taking the time and all of that.
Keep something. Yeah. I've stopped stress eating Jelly Bellies because I was like, I'm gonna lose all my teeth. So
Or
now-
Sour Patch Kids.
well, I now stress eat dried mango. I was like, at least I won't get scurvy. Like,
I mean, the fact is you have no idea what's going to happen.
yeah, this is
No, that's,
Yeah.
don't. And, we expressed yesterday on a CCSSO call that it's really uncomfortable to be just sort of sitting in reaction mode. I think we've heard that from our delegation, staff as well, like there isn't a whole lot we can do about any of this,
Other than sort of like business as usual
Yeah.
in a way, which is even what feels risky.
Right. Yes,
I mean,
exactly.
in terms of the title allocations, the Perkins and the IDEA, our districts have what they need to know for Title I at least for next year.
Mhm.
So they are not feeling that same level of anxiety around what they're
Right.
doing in their budget for next year.
Right,
It's the next phase of all. So that is something at least that's.
And we don't talk about all of this. Right, there's no point worrying people unnecessarily about what might happen when people start down that road. Like, we don't know. Just let's wait and see.
Yeah.
Do our delegation people sort of feel as in the dark as everybody else? I assume so, just because.
I don't know about in the dark, but how, powerless, was the
Yeah.
sense I got when we were there in March, like.
Yeah.
These processes don't require
Be included.
right? So,
But I just, the Sanders team it was great. It was a really
Right.
great partnership that we've had, and we actually have a meeting with Manuel in 2 minutes. So
Yeah.
we're gonna touch base, and that has been great. And they are, I think, looking for whatever they can do to help. And that
Yes.
was really, really helpful. So,
and Manuel shared when we were there in March that that the secretary, the senator himself has made multiple calls, I guess, to.
he
Linda
bumps
McMahon.
into the secretary in the halls. So I
Yeah.
think whenever he does, he's like,
Makes a point.
don't
Yeah.
forget Vermont.
Yeah, so for what it's worth.
It falls on the category for what it's worth.
Yes.
Fine.
Two different people meeting in a hallway. That is two very different people.
Two very different people. I actually would love to be a fly on the wall of that conversation.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you.